Is that the Red Cliffs of Dover? Looking at there, David. You're on mute.
Cliffs of Moher, I bet.
Yeah, I suppose
That is correct. That is Ireland.
Yeah.
the white cliffs are rarely in sun like that, I suppose.
Yeah.
North
Yeah.
Shore of Monona.
When I went there, it was so foggy, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face.
Yeah.
So
I was there on St. Patrick's Day, and St. Patrick was there too. He gave me a hug.
If I ever get lonely, I'll try dressing up that way, right?
My name isn't Irish. I am. I'm almost all Irish. Just married a German guy. Or a guy whose ancestors were from Germany.
Yeah.
Hey, Todd, congratulations on your being accepted into the diversity
Oh, thanks, Jeff.
program. That's wonderful for you and for us.
Nice of you to say. Appreciate it. Our first meeting with the cohort group is next week. So I've got a big pile of papers to read from the Kettering Foundation. Somewhere here, I got a thick stack that I'll be going through, but I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, we're at 6:01, so we can get started if everybody's good with that, since we try to keep on our time frame. Is there anybody that wasn't going to be here tonight, Todd, that let us know?
Not that I know of.
I think Jeff Smith is the only one. Is that right?
Yeah,
I think that-
I'll
all right, so
I'll go through roll call if you want.
I'm actually going to call the meeting to order, and go ahead, roll call.
Anne Lewandowski,
Muted.
But also present.
David Kennedy,
Present.
Chris Zellner,
Yes, here.
Jeff Tews,
Yes.
Kristen Runge,
Here.
Al Dassow,
Here.
and Jeffrey Smith. Okay,
Thanks, Todd. Okay, first thing we have is minutes. So I'd look for approval of the minutes unless somebody has any changes they need to make.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which is December.
Motion by Anne Lewandowski.
Second.
I think I got Kristen on the second, and she got herself muted immediately after that, which was a pretty amazing. So any other comments? Okay, Todd, roll call vote quick.
Anne Lewandowski,
Approve.
David Kennedy,
Approve.
Chris Zellner,
Yes.
Jeff Tews,
Approve.
Kristen Runge,
Yes.
Al Dassow,
Yes.
6-0.
Okay, next we have public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to make any public comments on any item that's on the agenda or off the agenda? It looks like we have two attendees, Todd.
Yep, I'm watching. If anybody does want to make a comment, pop your hand up. They're not jumping at it.
Okay, so no hands up. So we're going to move on then from public comment to our first item, which is new business. Discuss and consider recommendations to be made to the village board on options for addressing housing task force recommendation 7, smaller development projects, and 8, small scale real estate ownership projects.
And since we missed that in between month, Nicole and Jason and I did do that video along with Kristen. You were there too, weren't you, Kristen? And you were there, and you were there. And hopefully that was helpful because we do want to try to be productive. Maybe I'll allow Nicole to give some news, but I believe this is her last meeting with us for a couple of reasons. One being the scope of work coming to an end. And Nicole, do you want to share your other news?
sure. I've actually accepted a new position, so we'll be leaving WPHD. So actually Friday is my last day, but I want to wrap this up, and we'll probably do some additional work on summarizing this for your March meeting as well. So this isn't the last that you'll hear from me, but yes.
Oh, good. Lucky us. I've been telling Nicole how mad I am at her for a bit. You've done a nice job. I look forward to completing the project with you. So, hopefully that video was helpful. And Nicole, do you want to maybe run through your slides just a little more, more briefly?
Yes.
Maybe just show. Was anybody unable to access the memo or review the memo?
Yes.
everybody did? Looks
I
like,
reviewed it, yes.
looks like they've all consumed that. So you can give it more cursory and then we'll jump into discussion, okay?
Okay, great. So the first recommendation here was the village should work to identify land and developers for smaller development projects. And so I'm gonna jump through because we kind of talked about how this fits within the existing comp plan and zoning for the village, and jump to the potential recommendations that the CDA could consider. And again, the idea is that we would like to come to some consensus on recommendations from these two items tonight, and we can combine it with those consensus items that we talked about earlier regarding TIF and other gap financing sources into one kind of recommendation memo.
And we could probably tell folks, Nicole, too, that you actually have the other half of that memo from the CDA to the board in draft form, ready to go. So this information is going to be quickly conjoined, and then we'll dive into that in March. So we should be pretty good to go then.
Yes. Yep. So regarding these small scale developments, one thing that we talked about was expanding the use of what's called the R4 zoning district. And this is a zoning district that allows small projects up to 8 units, and it allows them by right. That doesn't mean that they don't require some other, village approval process in terms of things like stormwater and stuff like that. But from a zoning and massing standpoint, properties that are in this zoning district are allowed to have up to 8 units. Right now, this is a zoning district that's in the village's ordinances, but is not being used on any parcels. So one idea would be to expand the use of this and even potentially identify parcels that the village thinks would be a good fit for these smaller scale projects and rezone them in advance to encourage development of those properties. The idea being here that these smaller projects, a 4-unit, a 3-unit, stuff like that, are typically developed by someone local, someone who's really familiar with the community. They're not a big developer, but they might be looking to kind of expand their, investment portfolio or just look to manage something on their own. So having properties that are already zoned to allow for this type of development really reduces their risk and upfront costs. So are there any thoughts on that? Do we want to get some discussion just as I talk through these?
Yeah, maybe Nicole, and I know you're wanting to check things on the list to confirm that the CDA is on board with that recommendation that you can then implement into the board memo. So it might be the best way to take it point by point.
Yeah, okay. And, a couple of these items I have noted, obviously they would require some sort of plan commission action, but I think it's important that the CDA is considering this from a housing availability and affordability standpoint, and is again looking at these as strategies to improve housing options in the village. And while the Plan Commission would look at it more from a planning and land use standpoint.
Is there a typical size property that this would require? When we're talking about infill, et cetera, how, to create a picture for us, what is typically an R4 type building going to require for land?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that there are, and Jason, I'm sure knows this better than I do. I believe there are some minimum lot size requirements within the zoning ordinance. I don't have them off the top of my head.
Just getting to that, see if I can navigate to that quickly. The minimum size, it's on a, it kind of scales up based on the number of units. And so it's 8,000 square feet for the first unit. 8,000 square foot minimum, including 4,000 for the first unit, and each for each additional unit. This is the R, which is 8,000.
43.7 is an acre, right? So you're talking 20% of an acre.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So 8,000 square foot minimum, but if if you're having 8 units, you're talking about 12,000 square feet.
Is that total footprint? That would include garage?
That's the lot.
That's the lot size. Okay.
And I see your hand up.
Jeff and I must be on the same wavelength, because that was essentially my question. What is the minimum square foot? Do we have a minimum for each unit?
There are separate unit minimums in the zoning ordinance. I'll have to come back to you with that. They're not in this district, I don't think.
Okay, because I think that also makes a difference in terms of what the outcomes we might see. I am not opposed to a potential for smaller efficiency units for some people. I think for young adults, I've lived in them and they're helpful.
So from a context perspective, Jason, I think Savannah Village, in most of the area, the lots are under 8,000 square feet. I think there's a lot that are your 7,800 square feet for that single family home. What is the largest building that can be built on here? Because when that was originally platted for that, we assumed they were going to be smaller homes, but most people built much larger. Is that something that comes into play here or not? If we can limit the size of what's built there from an affordability standpoint. Not saying that we have to do that. I'm just saying, is that something that's in there?
A maximum size on units?
Yes.
Not in the ordinance, no.
Okay.
For, you have minimum setbacks.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And, that also gets into the minimum unit size, Chris. So if we reduce the minimum unit size, we can potentially reduce the size of an overall project that's going in, right? So, because that'll be a compounding factor. So rather than having large minimum units, if we go a little bit smaller, we'll have the potential for a smaller outcome.
Okay, thank you.
Are you suggesting that we have the ability to limit the size of an 8-unit complex by unit?
I don't think we can do that, can we?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm asking the question.
I don't think that we can limit the size, but if we're looking for affordable, our minimums should be pretty minimal, so that we're not driving larger development, is my point, if that's what the question is.
Yeah, and that's obviously the question I'm getting at too, is how do we put together an 8-unit apartment complex? And it doesn't matter what 6 or 5 or whatever it is, doesn't matter. But how do you put together a 8-unit apartment complex with parking, and how do you control or restrict such that the building such that it's affordable as opposed to market rates?
I guess one of the things I would offer there is that part of the intent of these methods is that they are market affordable,
Mhm.
in that they are inherently smaller, they're attached, they're a little less expensive to build on a per unit basis. And so it's a way of getting at affordability without necessarily subsidy. It's not a guarantee, but it's another strategy in the toolbox.
Yeah, I would say that this recommendation is not purely about affordability, although obviously the goal is with these smaller, maybe locally owned projects that you can have a more affordable unit, but it is also about having a variety of housing types and sizes within the village and not just adding large apartment buildings.
Go ahead, Ann.
One thing that we hear a lot about in sort of the incremental development world or the neighborhood development world is the revisitation of parking units. And so I appreciate Al bringing that up. So if we have existing units that have parking or do not have parking minimums, are we going to require them to scale up, because that will make the housing more expensive to accommodate those cars?
By scale up, you mean?
You know, comply with, so for instance, let's just take the bank on South Street, right? The old bank building. Let's say that was identified as a space that could be R4 zoned, and this is purely hypothetical. This is not to pick on them, but I think it's a good example. That lot does not have the ability to expand parking into it. So we would then need to talk about knocking down other buildings or somehow subsidizing that. So that's an infill project that would be changing a use, not necessarily changing the building. So the question is, would we require that new use to come in at a parking minimum for the new use versus leaving it alone, if that makes sense?
I feel like we might be on a tangent here. I get the point. I understand the concern. But if we're looking at using R4 zoning for smaller projects, I use the term sometimes borrow trouble. I don't want to borrow trouble of other things that we might not run into. If we were redeveloping a building downtown, that would probably become before the plan commission. There'd be other things we'd be thinking about. But if we're looking specifically at this recommendation, R4 zoning for smaller projects up to 8 units, would we allow this by right? And would we allow for dwellings for accessory units? Do we need to consider parking with this? And I'm asking Jason and Nicole.
I think if this went to anything being rezoned to R4 would go to plan commission, any parcel, whether it was an advance or for a project. And also, I mean, if this is going to be used more, since it's not being used right now, the plan commission may want to review the specific requirements within that zoning district. Things like you brought up unit sizes, lot sizes, parking requirements. If this is going to be expanded, you may want to revisit the requirements within the specific district before implementing it.
Okay,
I guess I wouldn't have even thought, and again, I'm the amateur in this group. I wouldn't have thought there would be the opportunity to build without having parking be accommodated. Is that indeed allowed?
I would suggest that the question is not whether we don't require off-street parking, but whether we allow for discounts to that off-street parking to lessen that demand in the interest of reducing the land cost associated. And so is there adjacent on-street parking that supplements without depriving others? Is there a credible case to be made for demand management, meaning people can get around by other means? Maybe in the village of Wanakee. Is there a case to be made that the occupants here have lesser need? I don't know. So I guess I would personally agree with Kristen that, yeah, it's something to think about, but I don't know that that it's worth diving too deep into all the permutations. And if I could extend that, you guys' questions got me thinking about what are the dimensional standards of these lots and what can actually play out here. And so just bear with me, a 12,000 square foot lot that by the ordinance would allow 8 units, you take away 18 feet from each side for the side setbacks, 30 feet from the front, 40 feet from the back. You're left with a 3,200 square foot footprint, which is probably just 2 units on the ground floor. You could arguably stack those 3 high in Wanakee and have it make sense. And so you've actually only got 6 units on that lot. I think there are some constraints that would push lots to be bigger than the minimum when starting to put more than 4 units on them.
So Jason, I guess that gets me to the point of if the goal is to allow 8 units by right, and again, this may be tangential, but it doesn't sound like the minimums get to that, which continues to drive more expensive development because of additional land purchase.
I think that's a fair point. Go ahead.
Yeah, the other part is, at what point do you need an elevator? when you go from 2 levels to 3 levels in ADA requirements, at what point does an elevator have to be implemented, which is a $60,000 investment or something like that. You know, these are all details. In general, I agree with the R4. I like the R4, 8 units. It is not for the major players. It's going to be for the mom and pops who want to start rental properties as their profession. I just don't know how we get it into the affordable category because they're going to want market rates like everybody else. There's not enough money in an 8 unit to, let me put it differently. There's a challenge in 8 units to make it profitable. And that's why you don't see a whole lot of players in that 8 unit market. Now, in reviewing what Jason said on the video, tagging on to a bigger complex, that might work, or putting 2 8 units or 3 8 units together, that might work. But to have 1 8 unit by itself, it can work, but it's going to be a struggle to make it, to find a developer who's going to do an 8 unit project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Financially, they are certainly difficult. I think, you know, the idea being if the village would like to have these smaller infill projects, which is certainly desirable to have a mix of these and larger projects, then, you know, hopefully you can make it as easy as possible for someone who can make it work in a site that makes sense. But I agree that it is challenging. No doubt about that.
So Nicole and Jason, how would you recommend identifying locations that would be participating? Would this be part of our university group, or because I think the location which would possibly drive lot size would be just as important in this situation. So how would you recommend identifying if these areas?
I think that could be through the university project, or you know, I don't want to commit Todd's staff time. I think it's, you know, about an overall discussion of not just sites that are appropriate for this type of development, but, you know, having sites in mind for larger projects that, you know, for the next Cohen Esri that comes along, you know, having a sense of project or sites that are a priority for redevelopment, infill, new development in the village is important to have for when those opportunities come up.
I saw Kristen come off mute. I know what she's going to talk about.
I saw Tom Landgraf this afternoon. I have to send him a follow-up note to our meeting, but I can ask him if he's back in business with his students I think are out in the field if not this semester, this fall. And he'd offered to do it for us. He sent his MBA students out.
If I could comment on this one, the R4, a couple of things. One, as far as I'm aware, this is not a mapped district anywhere. It's not in use. It's not on the zoning map. It's in the code, but it's not used. What parcels would you pick? I don't have any in mind myself. I have some reservation that while the whole point is to make it as easy as possible, I also don't want to set up a situation where we give this type of housing a bad name because it seems to just explode on people without any right to guide how it happens. And so I'm very conflicted about this because on the one hand, I get the point and we want to streamline. On the other hand, I believe a lot in the things we built into the comp plan to say that design matters and that transitions matter, and that even though the process is harder, it probably makes more sense to do it through a PUD process. That's where my planner and urban designer head goes, even though I know that's harder. So I just want to share my internal conflict on the zoning approach to getting to this missing middle housing.
Jason, one thing that I struggle with that approach, that the control that PUD might offer, is certainly the development by right is easier in a known process, but also we have rather large lot minimums that would drive up the cost for a PUD, right? I mean, is it 5 acres or 3 acres at this point?
it's on residential, it's 5 acres. And I think that's a really good point, Ann, that, you know, if we start talking, hey, well, what about PUD? Would that cause us to rethink a minimum size on a PUD as an alternative approach? I think that's right on.
Any further comments? David, any comments from you? You have the best setting tonight, just to be clear. I think we all established that, so.
Well, it seems to me that this R4 zoning and talking about it going up to 8 units doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You know, where is there going to be a demand, and to what, you know, if you try and, you know, take that density, you know, what is the neighborhood going to say? And you're going to have, you know, I think plenty of pushback from that. You know, if you took as an example, Todd, in your slide, you talked about the RG heating site on West and between 4th and 5th, 3rd and 4th. You know, here's a couple of old commercial buildings that, you know, have outlived their life. Probably not a lot of potential use for them in other commercial endeavors, but I don't know that that site in itself is all that large. And then, you know, what are the neighbors? Those are old neighborhoods, but what do they feel? How are they going? If you were going to try and plug an 8 unit into that, and is there an alley splitting those 2 buildings? There is, I believe, yes. So you know, these are, you know, every site is a challenge. I think if you're trying to talk about finding spots, you know, in town that, okay, here's a potential site, but most of those neighbors aren't going to feel that their neighborhood's run down. So it's, you know, none of these questions are easy. But I think 8 units in a lot that size is awfully small.
Okay, go ahead, Jason.
2 further thoughts. One, I might offer the suggestion that this is worth considering, but that it maybe be coupled with detailed neighborhood planning. So we've talked about like Main Street transition zone planning effort. And it's conceivable to me that we would identify some sites, hypothetically, I don't have any specific in mind, but that we might identify sites in that the downtown transition zones that would be appropriate for this. Again, that's a hypothetical, but it could be other areas of the village that are targeted for some redevelopment planning like Century, that this is identified, and we identify the sites in the plan, and the plan really guides it. And then we say, yeah, this is ready to be rezoned, or we even proactively rezone it, but we've identified the sites ahead of time. So I would add that qualifier to this, perhaps, if including this one. And the other is that I like the idea of revisiting the minimum lot size on PUD as another tool in the toolbox.
So, I mean, from a downtown neighborhood perspective, there's a pretty rundown 3-unit right next to the RG building. And so I think that if there was a reasonable expectation and some design standards like Jason is talking about, I think that my hope would be that it wouldn't immediately be off of the table for revitalization to come through to that location. And I think that that's where working together to create a plan that is proactively acceptable and designed for these specific lots creates an opportunity for both the village and the neighborhood to feel that their wants, needs, and desires are considered, rather than having an outside developer drive that process.
So perhaps an adjustment to this could be, consider opportunities for R4 zoning districts and smaller PUD projects during the planning process. Like Jason said, I think, and this is something that developers look to as you look we look at the adopted plan. Okay, this area says it could be, up to 3 stories. That kind of fits within this zoning district, or we could do a PUD. But then when you go to the public to rezone it, you can point to this plan and say, hey, I'm trying to do what's in this plan, but it also allows for that feedback from the neighborhood so that they have input on that development and it's not just allowed by right and they don't really have a say, if that makes sense.
Jason or Nicole, could you give maybe some examples of any communities around us right now that have, maybe they've just implemented something similar to this, or they're using this as part of their plan?
Well, I'm on the Madison Plan Commission. We are in the midst of this process, but I mean, it's a big, undertaking, even for that, in terms of adjusting the current zoning districts to allow for more uses and more density by right, and kind of push the limits for what needs a conditional use. So that's kind of where it comes to mind.
So maybe I don't like to use us to compare to Madison because we're just so different than Madison. So what I'm trying to get a feel for is to the point, how are residents going to feel when these are going in? Is there been pushback in other communities? That's what I'm trying to think or come up with to hear from it.
Anytime you put in multi-unit housing next to single-family housing, there is pushback everywhere in the country.
Okay.
There's my short answer.
I
It
would
just
say
gets
that-
more personal in a smaller town, right,
Yeah.
Chris?
Exactly. That's why I'm not asking about Madison. I'm thinking of similar sized communities to ours that these have been happening, and what that perception has been in the community.
And I mean, all of the smaller communities that I have worked in, most of them do have zoning districts like this on the books, but again, they're not really utilized. Anytime you're doing a project that's of any, that's more than 2 or 3 units, you're really automatically going to whatever, plan development, PUD, whatever kind of process they have for that site specific zoning, which is what Jason referred to. So this is, I would say, more proactive than what is being done in most of the smaller communities.
And my last question was, do we have, or that you're aware of any or all developers that are interested in this type of project in today's world? Based on talking about where the finances are with doing this, do we have many that are interested in this that you're familiar with? Within other communities, have they been doing these on any kind of regular basis or not?
I mean, I don't know of large developers. When I, go around the communities, for example, even in Dane County, you see small 3 units, 4 units popping up, and it's usually, again, someone local, had the land or was able to get it and decided to do something kind of on their own. So it's not, larger developers that I'm familiar with. But you certainly see.
Or it's a dabbler, someone who dabbles in it. Maybe I think in my career here, 2 or 3 times I've gotten a call from someone saying, hey, I've got a 10 unit in McFarland and a 6 unit in Mount Horeb, and I'm looking to do another one. Do you have any spaces where I could do something like that? That's the type of person that I've heard from, and the conversations don't usually last very long because we don't have the zoning classification or a location suitable. They're also looking for, it seems like they tend to be looking for a bargain. That's just like just a feeling I get, like they're looking for the deal. Kind of, what are you laughing for, Chris?
Well, that goes back to the financial side of it. I mean, that's why they're looking for the bargain, to see if they can turn the profit that they're.
Yeah, they're not usually asking about TIF because they're really not, they're not that interested in being that savvy. They just want to have a little place to sort of simply run with them and their buddy, or
One
Okay.
further point of reference, looking at the Middleton ordinance and Middleton zoning map. Middleton has a district R3 that allows up to 8 units, minimum lot size 7,200 square feet. There was almost none of it mapped. I see one parcel, and it's a large one. I think that speaks in part to the idea that there isn't high demand for this. I am more optimistic that we get to this type of housing through larger PUDs as part of neighborhood planning than site by site. But I'm open to the idea that as part of neighborhood redevelopment planning, that we could find opportunities to utilize it.
Okay, so from a recommendation standpoint, can you share with us what your recommendation is? Or do we have any feelings from our members that what our recommendation would be to the village board with regards to these? So I see a lot of stares.
I think that a recommendation could be as Jason was talking about the planning process, so consider opportunities for smaller development project, areas in future planning efforts, and then also the revisiting the minimum lot size for PUDs, as was mentioned. I think that those are two things that could be incorporated into a recommendation.
Anne, go ahead.
So it sounds like from what I'm hearing in the conversation is we should really identify and use the MBA students from the university program to do the financial analysis and determine if this is a recommendation that should move forward. So I think that a recommendation that is to have university students evaluate the ability to use R4 to incentivize, smaller 8 units. And if their recommendation and identify that this is something that is economically feasible, we would support it.
So I appreciate that. We can't get that specific because this is a class assignment. So we will get a menu of options of suitable locations. But
okay.
The financial analysis and that
Okay, but still, even just identify
opportunities. Yeah.
Just identify if they feel that there is opportunity to use this R4 zoning. It seems like that would be an appropriate evaluation process. If they don't want to do the financial analysis, that's fine. But I think that right now we could use some additional expertise in identifying these sites and determining if it's really viable.
Jeff, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't want to go away from the R4 discussion around smaller projects, but if I go back to the task force discussions, we talked about fill-in type projects, and and I don't think we limited or directed that towards 8 units. And so I just want to go back, and are we trying to solve a problem with this parameter, or take the opportunity to find smaller fill-in projects where there's a old barn or a garage on a city block that could come down and could be used. And I thought that at that point, that's where we were going to use the interns to try to do a scope of the land and say, okay, is there one that a Habitat for Humanity would want to plunk a single family home in? Are there duplex opportunities? I don't know quite how we got to this spot of saying it's 8 units, and maybe I missed something, but I thought the task force was looking at a wider range of opportunities.
I think that's what our goal is. I think within the R4, we can up to 8 units, correct?
Yeah.
So
I think though, as soon as you say 8 units, everybody thinks 8 units, right? Why do we have a unit count in there? And, to a maximum. I mean, I think you are automatically implying that you're going to cram to somebody. I got R4, I can cram 8 units in here and maximize my return. So I think we should take the 8 units out of there. it just really has a bad connotation to me in terms of the visual of, taking a small lot and cramming 8 units on it.
Right.
And I think that just reflects how that district is defined.
Yeah.
So if we took out the 8, how would we term that then? How do we designate size? What would be appropriate?
I think it's appropriate to the opportunity, to the lot space. I mean, I think there are going to be some opportunities for 1 or 2 homes on a piece of property that we ought to consider that if we can find a way to, and Kristen, again, back to some of the folks you brought to the task force to think about those funding opportunities that some other communities have taken advantage of, and see if we can't at least understand from the study perspective, understand if there are opportunities for smaller than 8-unit projects, and if there's even some single family opportunity that we can make affordable. And again, that's the whole remodeling question too, the funds for doing remodels of existing homes.
So you don't need R4 though, if you're talking about single family, right?
Right.
And what's our minimum? That's an R1 or an R2 zoning, is it? Or R2 duplex? But
I guess I'd like to offer maybe another idea, which is to generalize this a bit and to say that expand the use of zoning districts that allow for projects of 2 to 8 attached units. Where I think that's what we're going for here. We're going for attached units at small scale. We're going for that missing middle stuff. It's not always going to be affordable per se, but it's going to lean in that direction, and it's going to make for a more diverse housing mix in the village.
I would be okay with that.
Okay, do we have a consensus on that? I guess we should, if everybody's okay with that, if it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down, I guess. I'm a thumbs up. Okay, I think I saw and I don't know if I saw your thumb up. Yeah, there. Okay, there it is. Kurt, it was you talked about it, so I was assuming you were going to be good with it. So okay, so that's acceptable verbiage for us.
Okay, I have
Nicole,
that verbiage down. Okay, so then the next one is to allow accessory dwelling units with a conditional use approval on properties with owner-occupied single-family homes and residential zoning districts. So the idea being here is to allow a little bit more density within single-family residential zoning. It would have to be an owner-occupied home. That's generally a requirement for ADUs. This is, what you typically think of as a unit over a garage in the backyard, and it may be occupied by a family member or parents, or it may be rented. Any thoughts on this?
I have a couple of questions on this. I think generally there is an appetite downtown, particularly for many of us are zoned R3 already, and so, but there are still many single family homes. I would question, so for instance, we have a neighbor that's a duplex, built as a duplex. Would he then have a 3rd unit potential for an ADU, or would it only be for the single families?
My understanding is it would just be for the single family, but that might change depending on your zoning ordinance, but how I've seen it is only for single family homes.
It would be atypical to allow it with duplex.
Okay, that's just sort of what I'm trying to understand, because that's definitely a loophole. And okay, do we have specific conditions around this in terms of height and all of that we're recommending, or does that come from the Plan Commission?
And is that going to include, is this supposed to be a completely self-sufficient standing unit like the small houses that they're building in Madison now?
Yeah, it would have a bathroom and yes, it would be self-sufficient. So in terms of, requirements and, dimensions and height and things like that, I think that would have to be really hammered out within an ordinance that goes through the plan commission. Yes.
Yeah, by way of definition, an ADU is a completely separate unit with its own exterior entrance and its own kitchen and bath and water service. But it can be attached, detached, over a garage, even in the basement. In theory, could be a variety of configurations. And I would expect that it would be kicked over to Plan Commission to hash out what the CUP guidelines would be that would be created before this would be opened up. And then they would also have CUP approval authority.
I feel like we have a considerable amount of this happening already. Is that fair to say in the community? I mean, in our downtown area, I know that there's a lot of multiple mailboxes on the buildings, and maybe they're not approved the way they're supposed to be. I don't know that answer, but I feel like, do we have that or not? And
So
you would,
Chris,
I mean, that's,
yeah, so I think it depends on what the perspective is. So we have two neighbors that are essentially duplexes, so they wouldn't be an ADU. This is really more, we have a couple of garages in the neighborhood that could potentially be converted to apartment space. And so I think it depends on what the situation is, because many of the homes were split into duplexes because that is allowed as a conditional use down here. And so that's what part of the reason why I was asking. Not all of the duplexes are like the ones in my backyard that were built for that. But it would make sense based on my conversation with Kevin that because I had asked about an ADU about a year ago, and what I was told is that if we wanted to build a second unit on our property, we would have to conform with a duplex code, and we would have to have all of the setbacks and front and side, that even if it was much smaller, say over a backyard garage apartment. So, and I've spoken with a few neighbors, and they're pretty supportive of something like that.
How is this fitting into the concept of affordable housing? Is it more about somebody trying to bring in additional income by setting up one of these units versus this really being a push for, more affordable housing?
So Dave, having lived on the coasts in some of the highest real estate markets in the country, what my husband and I often did was find ADU type apartments because they were cheaper, because they could be much smaller, in efficiency type unit that a young person could afford to rent. And then rather than needing to purchase an entirely new lot, it is a little bit more affordable to roll that into existing financing and refinance and invest in your own home. And much of the infrastructure is already to the lot, which can be very expensive in a greenfield situation. So it really does cut down the cost of development pretty significantly if you're talking about, small scale development from that perspective.
And we've had friends who have literally used them as granny flats, which you sometimes hear them called, as where they've moved a elderly relative into the accessory dwelling because the relative wants independence. They don't want to be in the house with the kids and the dog and everything. They want their own place, but yet they're not ready for assisted living and need that help of having a neighbor close, a family member on the property.
Mhm.
I know of some homes that have two flats where they develop the attic into a rental space, a complete unit by itself. I know that happens. But does the village have zero lot line variance? In other words, you keep talking about, I hear a lot about the duplexes, and I know a number of clients who had zero lot line their duplexes and made those duplex units much more affordable. I don't know how you do with an 8-unit complex, I know some folks have done it because you get into like a home or apartment owners association. But when it comes to a duplex, you're responsible obviously for your own half. But does the village have the zero lot line variance? Can that be done?
I believe so, though I think that's a different thing. I mean, that's separate ownership, and ADUs are not a separate ownership arrangement.
Okay, so is this something we want to include in our recommendation? Looking out there, I see one thumbs up from Ann. I see one from Jeff. I see one from Kristen. I got a down from Dave,
Yeah, I'm not.
and Al's in a down mode right now, and I'm sideways currently.
If I would add the commentary that you will not see a flood of these once you get around to setting the rules on them. It's a, household by household decision, and they come along gradually. They don't come all at once.
Well, I don't think you can make a recommendation to tell the board that they should do this without having any concept of what's involved in the size and the demands for it.
You could, as an alternative, encourage the Plan Commission to develop standards to allow accessory dwelling units by CUP.
I think that actually might be a better recommendation because we do already have 2 units. And so I think that may be a request to the village board to ask the Planning Commission to determine what appropriate guidelines would be for an accessory dwelling unit. And then if they wanted to come back to us, that I think would be reasonable.
So I'm more concerned right now with our 2 thumbs down, if that changes your mind on that, or if you're still in a thumbs down mode. Al or David?
It
Well,
doesn't change.
yeah, I don't think you're not comparing this to a duplex because these are 2 separate buildings you're adding to the density of your lots, and I don't see anything that tells me why this shouldn't this should make a lot of sense to me without having any kind of parameters whatsoever on what these are.
Al, any comments?
Yeah, and if I bought a home with the expectation that they're all single family around me, and then 1 or 2 or 3 of the homes start to allow and break down their single family homes into, for lack of a better term, duplex or flats, whatever you want to call them, and essentially turn into rental property at that point in time, I guess I'd be concerned as a homeowner who bought that home, not knowing that that was happening. And I might object to that as a homeowner, changing the context of the block they live on.
So Al, I think of that in the context of my R3 zoning district where a duplex is already allowed, but a smaller, more accommodating accessory dwelling unit. And Jason, they're usually less than 800 square feet, right? And even that's pretty large for one. Is that pretty contextual for that?
I've seen a variety of numbers. They tend to be smaller than they're smaller than the main house usually by standard. 800 isn't a cap that I specifically recalled, but
Okay.
they would not be comparable in size. They would not be a duplex in appearance or format. They would be smaller.
Okay, so I guess for me, I feel very comfortable in an R3 zone where I already know that there are duplexes allowed by conditional use to allow at least exploration and standard setting for an accessory dwelling unit. I can understand Jeff's points that, for all single family units, maybe that wouldn't be appropriate. But I think for an R3 where there's already duplexes allowed, that seems very reasonable.
So I'm leaning towards David and Al right now. Mainly because of how it changes that area, and as Al brought up, the existing homeowners may not be looking for that, as well as the people coming in may not know about it, and that changes the dynamic of where they live right then. Obviously, that if we zone it that way, it's zoned that way, and they should look at that before moving in. So maybe that doesn't make sense what I'm saying, but and maybe I didn't follow the arguments correctly. That I was trying to. But if I didn't, please enlighten me.
So my point, Chris, is that there's already a second unit allowed in the downtown R3 units. And so allowing a similar smaller unit to be allowed within the zoning with possibly less setbacks or whatever the planning condition would choose to do, that's fine. But we already have a second unit attached as a development by conditional use. So this does not change the character of the neighborhood really in any manageable way, besides scaling down the impact of those second units, which I think you heard a lot about with that duplex on the corner there of, Cross Street and Second. So this would be a way to reduce the size of that second unit and make it more palatable to neighbors.
So I guess maybe it's and a different way, and Al, perhaps to ask a question of you. Were you thinking of somebody that's already living in an R3 neighborhood, or were you thinking of somebody that was in a single family only? Because I don't think that's what the recommendation applies.
Yeah, I don't think we're not talking apples to apples, and I don't know what R3 is versus what I'm in R1. It's the changing of the zoning that's what bothers me. If I didn't check the fact that I bought a home in downtown Wanakee and it's zoned R3, shame on me for not checking if my neighbor decides to break down his house into 2 homes. But given if I bought a home in some other area, which is R1, my expectation would be that we'd all remain R1 at that point in time. So I think
I would agree with that. I just didn't hear
Yeah.
what we were talking about here. I thought we were talking about neighborhoods that are already zoned as R3.
Yeah, and I'm
And so,
reflecting on what Al said too, and I would also think that if you were in a single family home only neighborhood and then this was suddenly changed, that I would at least, if I lived in that zoning, if I lived in that neighborhood, I would at least expect a public hearing or an opportunity to talk about how this might impact and I would expect that in an R3 too. Maybe if we were to make this recommendation, it would go to the Plan Commission, and the Plan Commission would have to hold some sort of public hearing before adopting it as a recommendation, because I'm hearing what Al says pretty clearly.
yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is based on the recommendation that's available, it says single family. My personal recommendation is that we should amend that to areas in zones that already are for more than, that have a conditional use already for more than 1 unit. So for instance, R3, where there's already a duplex with a conditional use, and then that will, any trigger of that will, with the conditional use permit, trigger a public hearing.
Yes, every project, I mean, the initial, change, if the Plan Commission considered this change would come with a public hearing, and then every project that came forward asking for a conditional use permit would also have a public hearing.
Okay, so from a recommendation standpoint, are we ready to make a recommendation to those points?
So what, if I'm trying to incorporate what we've talked about here, it would be changed a bit to say, recommend that the Plan Commission be asked to develop standards that would allow accessory dwelling units with conditional use approval on sites that had owner-occupied single-family homes in zoning districts that allowed duplexes or more. Does that incorporate everything?
Yeah, the only reason I got hung up, Nicole, is your term use duplex again. It's not necessarily duplex that we're talking about.
Just allow 2 units.
Yeah, they're allowed 2 units. Yep.
Would it change anything for everyone if we appended to this to say that inclusion of such zoning lots in new neighborhoods should be encouraged? So that is, in my opinion, a much more palatable way to start introducing ADUs to a community, to just build them in as allowed from the beginning in new neighborhoods, in selected places as part of the neighborhood design.
I would support that.
I don't want to unnecessarily extend, and so if there isn't comfort with that, move on. But
It seems less stressful, so people would know when they moved in that this could happen or that they could do it.
Okay, everybody went quiet. So,
sorry.
Jason, do you have some good examples where that maybe has worked well? I think of what is it? Is it Middleton Heights or what is that over there by the grocery store on this side of Middleton?
Yeah, Middleton Hills.
Middleton Hills. I believe they've incorporated that granny flats and above garage into some of those by design. Am I right?
Yes, I believe you are. And I
Is
couldn't
that in a
point-
separate building though?
It's a couple different iterations of it from what I've seen. Some are above the detached garages. Jason, you might know better. I toured that development like 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's a very common format, is over a detached garage. I'm also, others may know this better than I. Did we end up with any of these in Heritage Hills as approved? I was just going to check that. I thought we talked about it, but I'm going to look now.
so it's 7:02 and I want to keep us on our schedule. We're still on number
Please.
7, so I want to get to number 8 and we still have another agenda item. So,
My appendix to that doesn't actually change it. It just sort of adds a little emphasis. And so we could still do that without, new neighborhoods can still include that.
okay, so Nicole, if you don't mind, if you could repeat what you said before and maybe change the terminology a little bit on duplex.
Yes, so the recommendation would be to ask the Plan Commission to develop standards for accessory dwelling units that would be allowed with conditional use approval in zoning districts that currently allow 2 units or more and are owner occupied. And then with the addition of supporting the inclusion of these zoning districts in new neighborhoods.
Okay, so does somebody like to make that motion? So Ann is making the motion to do that. Do I have a second? Okay, so I don't. Okay, Kristen, you're making a second? Okay, any other comments right now? Please raise your hand if you have another comment. Okay, seeing none, then let's do a vote. Todd, go ahead.
Al Dassow,
Yes.
Jeff Tews,
Yes.
David Kennedy,
Yes.
Jason Valerius. Just checking. Ann Lewandowski,
Yes.
Kristen Runge,
Yes.
and Chris Elner.
I'm gonna say yes. And Al, did you have your arm behind your back when you were saying yes?
Take 2, Al Dassow.
Going first is always difficult, I think. But anyway, okay, appreciate that. Let's move on then to our next item.
Yeah, so we're still on recommendations for
Yep.
that. So this one is a little more, I think, straightforward. Encourage developers to include areas designated for small and medium density projects within PUD zoning for subdivisions to create a complete neighborhood. And that's something I know that Jason talks about in terms of complete and balanced neighborhoods. It's just kind of stating that as a priority. So-
Anybody see that as an issue? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody shake yes. So, okay, so that one's good. Next one.
Okay. And then here we have consider developing a rehabilitation loan program for older housing stock, including both home ownership and rental properties. This is a program that would have to be developed. So this is just kind of the starting recommendation point and would need funding from TIP extension or some other sources, but is an opportunity to, you know, the idea being here is to support existing small scale developments so that they can continue being in the village and offer what is often called naturally occurring affordable housing.
I just chime in quick that, and you may have read it in my research memo that is attached. These wheels are invented. There's a lot of programs like this that have been successful. Our challenge is seed money. And fortunately, the village board has approved a mechanism for that that may help us here in the future. So from my perspective, this is doable. It is definitely a program that I've learned. There is rigor involved in management and oversight. It's not just a simple off you go and it's easy. It does take some effort, and that's something we'd have to evaluate as we consider a program.
And go ahead.
So I think you hit the nail on the head, Todd. Is there a place? So I know like Project Home does some of that stuff for the Madison market. How would you see the Village of Wanakee executing this plan? Would we bring it in-house? Would we try and contract? What is the mechanism for that oversight? Because I think it could be potentially difficult for us to do.
I haven't dug into it that deep. Maybe Nicole and Jason have seen some other examples, but off the cuff, I think both those examples are feasible. But I'd add, maybe there's room for partnership with Wanakee Neighborhood Connection. Maybe there's a collab opportunity where we work together on implementation.
Jeff Tews?
I've only lived here 17 years, so I don't have a lot of experience, but I think about Cannery Row. That took a property that looked like it could use rehabilitation when I moved in here, and now there's senior apartments there and at the village center. I'm just, what happened? Is that an example? And maybe that's something offline you can provide. Jason or Todd, you can provide for information for that kind of project. But was that something that the village participated in a rehabilitation of that property? And
yeah, that was a really complicated project, public-private partnership with brownfield funding and TIF involvement. Predates me. I think Chris was here to have seen that come together, but that was a very unique approach. I believe this bullet, you're talking about like freestanding single homes. Am I right, Nicole?
Yeah, so usually it would be a homeowner or a small rental property, and oftentimes the program is administered by the municipality, but the applicant, the homeowner, is responsible for getting their construction bids and putting things together, and then they apply to the municipality for those loan funds and get qualified. It can also be administered by other agencies, certainly.
So Jeff, were you thinking a different sort of program?
Well, no, I understand that this says older housing stock, rehabilitating of older housing stock. I just wondered whether that would be something we would include into some other properties that are abandoned or maybe not as extensive as Cannery Row was, but I can think of some down along the railroad tracks and some other spots that that perhaps that could happen on a smaller scale also. I guess my question was, do we want to think about including those kind of projects, or is this recommendation just around older housing stock?
I think, you know, this recommendation is kind of specific to the housing stock, but I think that those larger projects are more, you know, adaptive reuse of a different type of building falls more within, you know, what is being considered for like the Cohen Esri project, for example, where they're requesting specific funding out of, you know, the TIF extension or the affordable housing funds that the village has available and will be eventually looking at a policy for. So that might be, you know, maybe the same source of funding, but different programs, I guess, within it.
Okay.
And maybe,
Separate.
Jeff, as I look at this, I think this particular bullet, I would imagine, we're not talking more than like a $10,000 award max type of
Okay.
program.
Separate
Is-
item. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. I just wanted to clarify.
So when you mention home ownership and rental in the same sentence, does that imply that if I owned an older, you know, home, that I could turn it into a 2-unit by converting the upper level to a flat like so many have done on, where I used to live on 2nd Street?
Yes,
Is that the concept behind that too?
I mean, if that was allowed by zoning, you could do that and needed some gap financing. If it was funded through this TIF extension, you know, the tenants would have to kind of meet those affordable housing restrictions. And there would be other program guidelines that the village would have to develop in terms of eligibility for applicants.
So I'm just going to jump in. So this is something that's going to come back to us. This is part of our TIF extensions. So this kind of fits right into that. So the board on Monday night decided that we want to put this with CDA, which is where it should be, to come up with the policy for how we're going to use the funds from those TIF extensions when they take place. We had given the board instructions of that we supported using a TIF extension for our TIFs that are successful in closing early, that would be appropriate for us to extend those for a year. This would be a policy for those funds that would be there then that we could designate towards these types of projects, and what amounts, what the criteria is going to be. We're going to determine all of that within our committee to make the recommendation to the board. So just know that that's coming, and it's kind of fits right in with this. We're just not at that point yet where we've got a lot of information to give to you, as well as finishing. We want to finish that. We want to get it out there and available for people. The board approved unanimously a meeting or two ago, I don't remember exactly, that we would extend our TIF that we have, which is going to be about $450,000 that can be used towards affordable housing. So
You think though,
definitely-
Chris, that this remains an appropriate recommendation here and now though, right? I mean,
yeah, I
it
mean,
jives, right?
it jives. It's just we're going to be much more detailed in getting the policy done in a future meeting. This is just saying, yeah, we want to go down the road of having this program in place.
And if you come back through that further work and say, you know, we're just going to focus on single family home ownership, just hypothetically, I think you could do that and recommend that up to the board, and the board would be like, oh, okay, that's your recommendation. So I don't think you're locked in with exactly how this is written. It's saying, come up with a program.
Exactly.
Al, go ahead.
Yeah, a while ago, we saw a presentation on home ownership and funding the down payment based on affordable needs. I would like to throw that into the mix as well, that people have the ability to apply for down payment grants for them to purchase a home. I like that program. I think it fits within the criteria of the affordable home housing. And I'd like to at least explore that option as well.
Yeah, I think that can be part of that discussion we have. Absolutely, Al. Okay, is everybody okay at this point then with what's been recommended here? And that we consider that? Thumbs up? Okay, looks across the board. So, okay. Yes, we made it to recommendation number 8.
All right, this is small scale ownership projects, including looking at co-housing, cooperative, and neighborhood scale units. I ran through this example, and since we're getting short on time, I will not go through it here, about how a community land trust is structured in terms of the organization owning the land underneath the house and having a ground lease and restrictions in place that limit the future resale of that home and therefore have long-term affordability. This picture is from the Madison Area Community Land Trust, which has houses throughout Dane County. And this is on the north side, Troy Garden. So it's a community garden and set of community land trust homes. And then I also ran through some background on what co-housing and co-ops are. Group living arrangements structured a little bit differently, but the idea on both of them is that they are really a grassroots development brought forward by the community. And that, my recommendation in terms of all of the things that we're looking at is we should never, say no to looking at these types of projects, but really want to focus our time and our resources on things that are the most feasible. And at this point, I think that there's other opportunities that are more realistic to get done than co-housing and co-ops. So potential recommendations, consider opportunities for a small-scale CLT development consisting of rehabbed or new construction homes within a larger neighborhood subdivision. This would require some initial subsidy via that TIP extension or other funds. The land trust, for example, applies to Dane County and other sources for funds to do their projects. So it would be, looking for an area of the village where this seemed to make sense, and if the village or other sources were able to support that development and provide that long-term affordability for those homes. So is there any thought on the recommendation to consider opportunities for CLT developments?
Feedback? Al, go ahead.
One of the hot investments right now by the private enterprise is the purchase of land and leasing pads to people to build affordable homes on those pads. There's a number of them in Wisconsin as well as throughout the US. And right now it's a place for people to get more or less a guaranteed return. Guaranteed is a bad word. Get a return on their money based on the fact that they buy the land and then lease that land to a person who then puts a home on that. So if they were to sell, they sell the home, they don't sell the underlying land. Mm-hmm. I like that idea. I think it's got merit. I don't know how practical it is, and I don't know how it overlaps with a charitable organization. But if it can be funded through TIF extension, for example, to purchase land, and then that land is subsequently leased to a home builder for $1 or $2 or $10, doesn't matter, whatever the decision is, that then makes that home affordable for the person that moves in. And certainly there'd be some criteria on who can't, well, it's going to be based on neighborhood and other criteria. So it's just another mechanism. When I saw that, I know it's a hot investment program out there right now, but it certainly can be, and I never thought of it with a charitable organization involved, but it is something that maybe we should think about if the village is willing to participate in the land purchase and leasing that to create affordable housing community.
So when we go ahead.
Well, I think the problem, Al, with private developers, if David Kennedy's going to buy this land, there's always the constant pressure on my end to make it profitable, right? And I don't think that's the concept behind this. Is you wanted to somehow purchase this land and then allow the people to build the houses on it. If you're going to have just two separate ownerships, you still got the same pressure driving up both prices as time goes on. So that was, I think, the concept behind this is to purchase the land as a flat, and that stays at its level, and there's a lease rate associated with that that doesn't escalate. Otherwise, it's going up the same as the house is.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I think there's a way around separating, again, the land from the physical structure.
I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
So that's go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, so we've had experience, again, in more expensive land markets, this is pretty common. So we've had family members who have bought into a land trust. And again, you pay a nominal amount for the land or whatever, or you lease it. But then what you're really doing is buying and selling the house, and you don't ever really touch the land. And often the land is what appreciates, and there may be even caps on how quickly the appreciation can occur. So I understand your concern, David, but I think that there are ways to structure the deal, perhaps leaning on Al's experiences, that would allow us to retain affordability as we move forward.
So the other part, when we talk about our extension of TIF, it's just something else that we could consider into it if those funds could be used for it. Understanding that we don't have like an unlimited supply of TIF districts that are available for us, that we're going to constantly have a flow of money coming in. So those are the parts of the policies that we're considering as we go through and we do that. I agree that this could be something we should consider, most definitely. I don't know that I don't know that we have to make that decision tonight, though. Is that fair to everybody? I mean, I think this is, or do you want to accept it tonight?
I'd have to learn more before I could vote yes or no, because I'm not sure I understand how the money works for anybody that wants to invest in this. Al, you're saying this is a hot thing to invest in. Where's the money? Where's that opportunity? And we don't have to answer it now. I would just need some more information.
Yeah,
Maybe we want to come back to this one. Is
You're
that
saying,
what I'm
Chris,
hearing?
not answer it now, in other words, leaving it off of the recommendation memo, or wanting to reconsider it at a future meeting? Because Nicole's looking for that specific guidance on whether it should be on that memo or not.
I think consider opportunities from my perspective is okay. I would have to use those two words of consider opportunities to further understand this.
Yeah, I think if this is something that you want to explore, it would be bringing in, a representative, maybe from the Madison Area Community Land Trust, maybe bringing in someone else to talk about it on the private side, get a better understanding of how it could work and how the village could play a role in that. But this would kind of be the starting point of that process.
The upside could be too that you keep it on your list and money shows up because there's a group in Dane County that wants to do this and says, boy, Wanakee needs more affordable housing. We'll pitch into that. I would recommend that you keep it on the list.
Okay, so with that said, Al, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would go one step further from Jason's comment, and that is, and I point to not that it's applicable to Wanakee, but the Amazon devoting $2 billion to building affordable homes or houses around their warehouses. What's to say that some folks in Wanakee, employers in Wanakee, wouldn't be interested in doing such, allowing for building or doing something for affordable housing purposes or workforce housing?
Okay. So I think just with seeing with a thumbs up, if we're going to want to keep this in with the recommendation, using the terms consider opportunities, obviously. Okay, any thumbs down? Okay, thumbs up. All right, awesome. Good job, guys. Nicole, go ahead.
Great. The next one, again, here we're talking about small scale ownership projects. So that's why I mentioned here condominium opportunities, encouraging developers to explore condominiums for properties that are set aside for multifamily within a larger subdivision plat. So a lot of times those would automatically be converted to maybe apartments, and condos are not certainly easy all the time to develop, but I think encouraging a mix of condos and apartments where it makes sense is one way to have more ownership opportunities.
Nicole, something that's been sort of on my mind percolating is the HOA ability to hold developers liable for defaults in the condos in the first 10 years. Do you know how long that statute of protection exists in Wisconsin? Because what we could possibly look at is encouraging apartment dwelling where that is not a problem for the first chunk of time, where that liability exists, and then allowing them to convert into owner occupied units as that fades out and they do not have that potential liability.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'd have to dig into that a little bit more to get more detail, but that's a good question, Anne. Thank you.
Okay, anybody opposed to this? Thumbs up?
Great.
Okay, David, was that a neutral? Oh, I see the thumb now. Okay, it was in your background. Okay, sounds good. All right, next one then.
This is the last one, and it's something that the village has already started to do with the newer Viridian subdivision. So it's just kind of reinforcing, continue to look at lot size and design standards to allow for smaller, more affordable homes that can be naturally a bit more affordable just due to lower site and development costs. And Jason certainly has more experience with these type of standards, but I think, mostly these subdivisions are approved by a large PUD. So there's, they may be site specific in terms of the standards that we're looking at. But something that the village could encourage and look at as we review these larger PUDs.
Okay, comments or questions about this one, everybody?
How do
Okay.
you ensure that smaller lot sizes just doesn't mean houses crammed closer together?
It doesn't.
I think we've already seen that.
We have.
Yeah, I mean, and smaller lot sizes doesn't always lead to affordability, as we can talk about, as someone mentioned Middleton Hills, right? That's certainly not affordable. But the idea being that this is a way to allow for some more affordability without actually having the village or someone else provide subsidy to a subdivision.
Any other comments? I mean, Viridian is a perfect example of what's happening with that right now. So whether we're going to have another Viridian that's going to want to be placed here in Wanakee somewhere with the land, I don't know, but this gives us that opportunity. So anybody, I'll just ask, do we have a thumbs up or do we have any other comments? Kristen, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, I like encouraging it. We can't guarantee what a developer brings to us. They bring to us, but I like signaling that we're open to this idea, particularly if we've got a developer that can see us through the small lot sizes means smaller footprint for the house.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've sent the message already that the fact that Viridian subdivision is here. We hadn't had one of those. And when I say those, I mean the type of Viridian development that we're talking about here. So, okay. Any other comments? Otherwise, I look for thumbs up. Okay, I see everybody with David's again. And I think your thumb is up. There it is. Got it. Thank you. All right. Then I think that's everything. Perfect. Thank you, Nicole, with that. Okay, and then our last item is update on Cohen Esri. What time are we at? 7:28. So this is going to be a fast update, if that's okay with everybody, or if you have questions, feel free. Update on Cohen Esri Affordable Housing Project at 701, 705 Main Street. Am I giving this update, or who's giving the update, Todd? Are you?
We can tag team. I kind of wanted to do sort of to honor the CDA in that this work with Cohen Esri had some origination with the CDA. Your recommendations have been noted within the packet materials to the board. You saw those two memos that showed you the research. It's already indicated that the TID 2 extension has been approved by the board. And now we're making our way through some of the finer details related to the Cohen Esri project. Obviously, yesterday was an interesting day in discussion at the village board level. And I think, Jason, we were talking earlier and you made a good point about sort of the stage, the point at which the village board is at in carrying out the evaluation. Did you want to share that? If that's okay, Chris?
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to, I made note of the fact that the village board is continuing with the process that started at a staff level and has continued through, I think, your discussions at CDA and at Plan Commission, which is that we seek in this development in particular and in any income qualified subsidized housing outcomes that are consistent and complementary with the overall quality of housing within the village, that results in housing that is not notably lesser or stigmatized or different from the rest of the housing stock, and that is a good fit within the village. And so there have been many evolution or just adjustments to this process along the way to seek an outcome that balances cost and affordability with immediate and long-term quality and sustainability. And so I think that conversation was continuing last night with the board, and we're still working our way through to, is it safe enough? Is it parked well enough? Is it in a good location? So all that's still kind of on the table, but it feels to me like we're getting closer to resolving stuff.
And Chris and I had a meeting with the Cohen Esri folks this afternoon, and we are sort of in a time frame issue for them because they have expectations for shovel in the ground due to the LIHTC award requirements. And I think that is, it might be July 1 or sometime in June, that they actually have to be under construction, approved plans, off they go. So, we're here in the next 2 meetings of the village board. We would be expecting to see this through. And I maybe toss it to Kristen and Chris to see if there's anything you'd like to share based on the discussion and some of the feedback that we've heard.
Go ahead, Kristen, ladies first.
Thank you. Yeah. So can I mention the accidental release of the mic?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm my position on the project has been pretty public anyway. And I wanted to say why I appreciate the feedback from the board members who are bringing a different perspective and a different set of eyes than my eyes to this, because I think that's what caused some of the heartburn. And I get that it can be, for those that have been working on projects or have an opinion about this outside of the board, that it can be sometimes difficult to hear feedback that isn't necessarily in agreement with what we're thinking about our project. But part of the whole process is a real careful weighing of what might go right, what might go wrong. And some of the things that the Housing Task Force in particular really set forth as objectives for affordable housing mean that we consider this to be on par with all of the other types of housing. So last night, when we're having these robust discussions about, is this a safe area? We're having this discussion because we want families to locate in this area. We're asking the playground to be installed. And so we've got concerns. There are concerns about whether or not crossing the road is going to be safe. When we're talking about balcony widths and door openings and things like that, it's because we're really heeding in mind advice we've gotten from 2 people who I heard speak earlier today, Tom Landgraf and Kurt Paulson, that workforce rate housing needs to be marketplace quality. And I'm keeping in mind, as I'm hearing this feedback from my fellow board members, I'm keeping in mind their advice to me when I work on these projects is that affordability doesn't occur because we're lower in quality. It occurs because we are treating the debt service for a building differently. So when we're seeing these things come across, and I'm maybe not attending to this with my own eyes, I'm listening carefully to my board members who are paying attention to details that maybe I've glossed over. And the third thing, the location, we've also really talked a lot about where is the best place to put this in the community, because when people locate in these buildings and live here, we want them to be just as much a part of the community as they would be if they purchased an expensive home in an expensive subdivision. So this is a lot of, I think, what we were talking about last night. And I think it's been interpreted very differently when I look at kind of what's been said publicly. But I just want to say, as someone who is very pro for this project, I completely appreciate that there are other board members who are looking at this with a different set of eyes and forcing us to think these issues through. So I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn by sharing my opinion on that, but I thank those of my fellow board members who are carefully thinking about this. And that's all I had to say about it.
So I would just say ditto. I mean, everything, you did a very nice job of stating that. And the other part of it is why we pushed back what we're going to have for policies is figuring out the negotiation for this and having all the different factors that could be part of that negotiation. With what's been presented at this point from a safety issue, we talked about one road, one entry point into the project, that we're going to have 75, 80 cars, whatever it is, every day at 7 in the morning, potentially coming out in one spot onto a highway with a left-hand turn. How do we address those issues? And then I don't think that the Plan Commission has approved that yet. So are we going to have a second one? That's part of the negotiation that's happening with this right now based on the cost. So we were talking about different things, and I can say that in the closed session that I didn't vote or didn't give my opinion on which way I was going to vote at this point for that reason. Some of the things are just out there and we hadn't talked about. And one of the things that's not out in the public is all the conversation about what we would be willing to give to Cohen Esri within our TIF. The board voted unanimously to extend the TIF. So we know that the board is behind the project, or at least behind giving money towards affordable housing projects. So we have that out there, and I think that within the next meeting or two, we'll have a resolution on where we're going with that project. So.
And can I say one more thing?
Sure.
I forgot I have notes written down because that's what I do. But I was reminded today by somebody who I look to for a lot of solutions when I'm doing this on the job, that when we put in housing lasts for a lifetime, and I'm 50, so that lifetime is going to be well beyond my time on the planet. And so every decision when we're talking about what does a neighborhood look like, what is a building like this that's certainly going to last 75 years, what does that look like? We're trying to keep that in mind and make really careful and thoughtful decisions. And I was reminded of that by one of my mentors today. And I was like, well, this is the day I needed to hear that of all days. So
I just say, do any of you have any questions for us with regards to the Cohen Esri project? No hands up, no hands up. All right. So there's the update. I guess that's where we're ending tonight. And now we are 7 minutes late. So I apologize for that. I'm going to blame Nicole. She took too long telling us about her leaving and we didn't like to hear that. So her current employer and helping us anymore. So I'm kidding, Nicole. Congratulations on your new position. And thank you so much for what you've been doing and helping us as we go along here. So
Thank you.
I'll just say that.
Yeah, let me just add, Chris, to the CDA members, really good discussion today. I enjoyed, I said very little, and I enjoyed seeing that sort of complete engagement from everybody here. That's how this should work. And I'm thankful that this has come together as it has to work towards these recommendations. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Todd. So I need one more
Hey, Chris.
motion. Yes,
Chris?
Al. Yes.
Before we leave, I note your clock behind you is 9:45. So we
Yes.
have gone way past the time that's been allotted to this meeting.
So that is my clock. That is helps me to say that time stands still at times. I need it to stand still because I need more of it. So that's the clock. I have a cuckoo clock on the other side over here that I have to turn the thing off before I start these meetings. So otherwise it'd cuckoo during these. So anyways, and I don't want anybody thinking I'm a cuckoo, and maybe they do already. I don't know. So
You know what else it says is even a stop clock is right twice a day. So
oh, there you go. There you go. So, all right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the
move
motion.
to adjourn.
I'm giving it to Al, and I'm going to give Kristen the second, if that's okay with everybody. Just show of hands, we can go to our adjourn. All
Thanks,
right,
everybody.
sounds
Good meeting.
Thank you, everybody, for all your input tonight. Appreciate it, and have a
All right.
great. Thank you again, Nicole.
Good night.
So long.